Hello, everyone. I am Dani Klein Modisett. I'm the founder of Laughter on Call. And just a little backstory quickly about Laughter on Call. We launched in the healthcare space. For those of you who don't know, the company was created to help those facing Alzheimer's. And when I say those facing, I do mean me and my mother. That's how it all started. I taught stand-up at UCLA for 10 years and wrote books on laughter and family life. And unfortunately, when my mother became depressed facing Alzheimer's, I could not make her laugh. And I felt terrible about it. So I had the idea to hire a comedian to help. And it worked. And you can read all about that in an AARP article that I wrote that we'll put in the chat. Let's just say that I launched a business to help lots of people laugh in the face of the most difficult situations. And during COVID, we had to leave our in-person gigs, as did everyone, and move virtual. So we started running events, presumably for caregivers, and then we ended up with HR and very lucid people. And in fact, that is how I met our guest. But before I share that little bit, I'm going to introduce, in a professional way, Professor Alison Wood Brooks, because I have her bio right here and it's extensive. Okay. Professor Alison Wood Brooks is the O'Brien Associate Professor of Business Administration and Hellman Faculty Fellow at Harvard Business School. Yes. She teaches an award-winning course in the MBA curriculum called Talk, which is in fact what her book is based on, her best-selling book that we're going to talk about today. So many uses of the word talk. And was recently named a best 40 under 40 business school professor. Yes, and she's young. Oh, young and fabulous. And her research on the science of conversation has been published in prestigious academic journals, including the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and Psychological Science. She is the real deal, a behavioral scientist who's also very popular and accessible, and a mother and in a band. But we'll get to that because her writing has also been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, the New York Times, Scientific American, and of course, Harvard Business Review, which really is how we met. Professor Brooks holds a PhD in decision processes from Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania and a bachelor's degree in psychology and finance from Princeton. Ladies and gentlemen, so fantastic. Yes. Well, let you talk, for goodness sake. So
When
say hello.
you started by saying her resume is very extensive, and I thought you said expensive, and I was like, that feels right, Dani.
That's actually true. Expensive and expensive. But so yeah, I want to ask you something because we have so much in common, but I didn't know how much we had in common when we met. I believe you had written an article on the value of laughter in business. And then I reached out to you and then you were like, oh, let's have a conversation. Then we did. So that was crazy. And then there's more, but what I really want to get to you, and I want to stop talking because because I didn't know this, and this is a quote from Alison's book. When I close my eyes and think about the person I want to be, she's laughing. And I'm telling you, every time I read that, I get chills. And so I just didn't know that about you. And so I'm very curious, like when you first felt that way and how that came to be your image of yourself. And then we'll do all the academic intense talking too.
It's so funny. I think ending up when you read out my sort of like accolades from my resume, it makes me sound like a very serious, intense person. And I guess probably a lot of people feel this way is like you end up in a career or in work where sometimes what you really care about and who you want to be is a little bit like misaligned with how your work sounds. Like being a professor at Harvard sounds really serious. And I do take my work seriously, but I have never and will never take myself very seriously. And I come from a family that's like, like humor and laughter are like oxygen. Like I really cannot live without them
Mhm.
and don't want to, like if as soon as the day goes by where I'm not laughing with my family, with my friends, with my colleagues, I think something needs to change. And I didn't really realize how that like not everybody lives that way until I started teaching hundreds of students at once. And I realized, wow, these kids, these people are amazing in so many ways, but a lot of them are really struggling to find levity in their lives, to create levity, to find levity. And I guess I just hadn't even realized that it was possible that you could go through life in such a sort of laughter-free uh, way. And I was curious as a scientist and as a teacher if I could help them have more fun, find more joy, find more connection through laughter.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that is, I think, how Laughter on Call ended up as a case study for your course, because you really wanted to land the message, like, and to have a conversation about, okay, well, what is the value from a business perspective of laughter? And obviously something we've been exploring for 6 years and kind of breaking ground on, I feel, largely due to the science that's come out about laughter. So I'm also curious for you, about communication and being a behavioral scientist. And I'm just going to act like Jane Q. Public here, and ask you what it means to be a behavioral scientist. Like, what does that really look like, and also what drew you to that field?
Yeah, I think everyone is in a way a behavioral scientist, right? A huge part of what it means to be human is that you're walking through the world watching other people, trying to sort of observe yourself, trying to figure it all out. Like how does this work? What are the people that are like doing well? What are they doing? The people that are struggling, like what seems to be going wrong there? And how can I do more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff? So I think in a way we're all casual behavioral scientists. Um, I took it a step further and decided like I really want to figure it out. And so the way that we do that is by studying lots of people at once, right? So we will study people in their lives, in their work, in their workplaces, and measure things to describe what they do. Like, what decisions are you making? How are you talking to each other? What risks are you taking? What are you not taking? How are you feeling while you're doing all of these things? So, very descriptive of what the social world looks like. And then we try and take it a step further where we run experiments. So we'll say, it looks like when you look at people on first dates, people who are asking more questions seem to be doing better descriptively, right? Like we can look at how many questions did you ask and like how many people agreed to go on a second date with you across thousands of dates. So we can describe that kind of behavior. But I wonder if I tell you, Dani, I'm going to make you go on a date and I'm going to tell you to ask more questions. Will that mindset actually help you do better on that date? And
Mm,
that's where the experiments come in, right? We randomly assign some people to ask a lot of questions and others to just sort of flow naturally and then measure the differences. And it turns out, yes, if you go into a conversation with this mindset of, I need to ask more questions, one, you can actually do it. And two, it helps you in lots of different ways. And that to me is very exciting as a behavioral scientist, is to both describe how people are and to find out these little life hacks that can help them be a better human.
yeah, I mean, that's what's so interesting about your book and the four, maxims, I think you call them, TALK, which, is that ultimately it's very similar to what I've discovered, whether I was teaching UCLA or figuring out marriage, laughter and marriage, Alzheimer's and laughter, employees and laughter, that these tools are transferable. So I'm sure as a Harvard Business School professor, everyone is like, thank goodness for the academic book on talking. And yet, in reality, and where the book grows to actually, is, no, this is for people. This is for anyone who's a person, you know, and that's what's so compelling about it. And I'm sure why it's going to have the kind of impact, you know, that it's having. And
It turns out that when you're doing work, you are a human being, right? Like it's,
right.
and actually one of the things that I sort of tackle a little bit in the book is that sometimes we think about work and non-work as very separate, but when you look, zoom in on actual conversations, the lines between work and non-work are very blurry. I mean, is it a work conversation if like one of your work colleagues like comes over to your house for a barbecue and like what if you're all wearing ripped jeans and not talking about work stuff? Or like, what if at your family holiday party, all of a sudden one of your cousins raises an idea that's like a pretty amazing entrepreneurial business idea? All of a sudden,
Mhm.
like what seemed like not very not worky becomes sort of businessy. And so like there's all kinds of gray area. And across all of those conversations, you're making micro decisions about what to talk about and how to talk about it and can we laugh about it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is 150% true in the Hollywood community, right? Because people are having ideas and sharing ideas all the time, and figuring that out, where the boundaries are of that can be tricky. And
Yeah.
so we should just get to the book, because T is for topics. And what I love about this is that this statement that you make, we need to speak intuitively in the moment, but also strategically. And I feel like, huh? Like, okay, Professor Brooks, tell me how I'm going to be in the moment and also think strategically, please.
Okay, here's what we find. So great conversationalists do both. They think ahead before a conversation starts, not in any sort of dramatic, time-consuming, hard way, but like a little bit of like, who am I going to be talking to? What do I care about in talking to this person? What do I want out of it? And what do they want out of it? If they want it just to be fun and like spend time together, or do we need to make an important decision together? Do we need to plan something? Am I dying to persuade them about something?
Hmm.
What are our goals here? And so the sort of starting point of the book is like, hey, nobody's actually thinking about what their goals are almost at all. And if you spend even like a tiny, tiny sliver of time thinking about what you want out of your interactions, you're in a much better position to make choices and choose topics that actually pursue those goals. So if our goal here, Dani, is like, okay, we love spending time together, but we also want to share information about my book. We also want to like explain why there's overlap between your work and my work. We should choose topics that actually go in that direction rather than let's just shoot the shit about whatever. So thinking ahead a little bit about what your goals are and what topics you might raise that will be help you pursue those goals and like have fun together and make it mutually rewarding sets you up to be in a place during the conversation to actually achieve your goals, right? Like you
Hmm.
get to decide what the meaning of success is, but you should be choosing topics that go in that direction to have any sort of chance of achieving what your goals are. Once you're in a conversation, then you need to be ready to improvise, right? So it's this blend of preparation and then flexibility in the moment. I love this quote by Charlie Parker, who was a famous jazz saxophonist. And he's like, you practice, 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 but once you're up on the stage, you have to let it all go and just wail. And I think that's exactly how conversation is. It's like practice, 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 and also prep, prep, prep. But then once you're in it, you got to let it go and try and be in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that that would apply even to a dating scenario. Like, what's my goal here tonight? And you talk about, being wanting to learn rather than persuade. That's something else that comes up in the book. And I think that's super interesting for all human interaction, but particularly in business, where we think, oh, we're supposed to right, I'm supposed to persuade you that laughter is going to change your culture. And so putting the focus on, and this is something that my sales person Joe does so well of like, no, asking questions, what do you need? And then let me plug the holes with laughter, you know? And so I think that if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, that would be cool too for people.
Yeah, every conversation, each person has an incredible constellation of things that they actually care about, ranging from learning and persuasion, brainstorming, enjoying our time together, maintaining privacy, all of these different things. But one thing that we've realized is some of them are more common than others, and some of them are like better to focus on than others.
Hmm.
So learning turns out to be much more productive, usually, than having in your mind this goal of persuasion. And so I run this workshop, for example, with entrepreneurs, this startup boot camp at Harvard, where we do an exercise. The first phase, even if your end goal is to sort of sell your entrepreneurial business venture to investors or really to anybody,
Mhm.
even if that's your end goal, you can't go into conversations thinking like, I need to sell, sell, sell. I need to persuade, persuade, persuade. You have to spend so many conversations like asking, figuring out what they need first, right? So that happens by asking lots of questions, by having fun together, by building trust, by not just hanging out with them because you ultimately want to sell them something. No, you need to like actually establish a meaningful, mutually rewarding relationship to start to understand why the thing you're selling may or may not be what they need.
Right.
And then at some point, once you've established trust and figured out what they really need, then you're in a position to be like, oh, I think I might actually have something that you need, and let me give it to you.
Right, right, right. And possibly if it's not a fit for them, you will have ingratiated yourself in a way where they'll be like, you know what, this doesn't speak to me, but I know someone who really could use this. So I think that that whole relationship idea and something that we talk a lot about too is like basically know your audience.
Yeah.
You know, that's like a comedy, like know your audience.
And
And
and I think that saying can be a little bit misleading. And know your audience almost implies like they're knowable before you've talked to them. I think the reframe of it is like learn your audience, like
yeah.
figure them out, ask them a
Mhm.
million questions, spend time with them and actually care. It almost makes it like know your audience makes it sound like you could Google them, Google the audience and figure out what they want and need. But often that learning process has to happen through conversation.
Right, right, right. Well, definitely what you're talking about definitely speaks to the individual, right? So you can know your audience. I can know that there's a specific senior community, for example, and their whole mission is turning fear into love. And so I can know that and know that that's, you know, how I'm going to walk in the room, but I don't know the actual person I'm talking to at the actual location.
Yeah.
And so I do think that that takes you know, asking questions and listening, right?
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that you break down like talk into this like pyramid of, you know, small talk, tailored talk, deep talk. And so I suggest everyone, you know, of course, go read the book. And I think they sound self-explanatory, but I'm very curious. Obviously, you don't start with deep talk in most circumstances, but I for some reason I have like a deep talk face and I end up in deep talk with people and then sometimes they never want to talk to me again because they've said too much. Do you know what I mean? So I'm curious about like what that's written in that evolves in a certain order, and if you could speak to that order and why that matters.
Yeah, I think the sequence varies from time to time. There's a really beautiful book by a sociologist named Mario Small called Someone to Talk to that suggests that actually sometimes it's easier to share really deep things with people that we don't know very well because the stakes are lower. Like your Uber driver or like a stranger on an airplane, they you might not ever see them again. And so sharing something you're struggling with or something like hard about your family is less complicated than talking to your spouse about it sometimes or talking to a really good friend or to a work colleague who toes the line between like work colleague and friend. And where you're bound to run into sort of like conflicts of interest in how helpful they can be to you. So that's one thing, is like actually getting to deep talk sometimes is easier with strangers in a weird way. The other thing is like, so it's a topic pyramid. At the bottom is small talk. The middle is tailored talk where things get more personal. And then at the top is deep talk, which is like only the two of you could talk about this thing in this way in that moment. We all kind of know that feeling when we've gotten to the peak of this topic pyramid. The advice is not like every conversation should be heading there. Like, I don't actually want to have a deep conversation with my neighbor while I'm taking the trash out, or like with the barista at Starbucks, and nobody does. Um, but just fostering a little bit of awareness of where you are on the topic pyramid, and feeling grateful when you are able to have those really magical moments of connection in deep talk. And then the sort of most important thing is just don't get stuck at the bottom in small talk for too long. I want to turn this question back to you, Dani. I suspect that you get to deep talk quickly because you have a relatively low tolerance for small talk. Like, you're just constantly looking for ways to climb the pyramid to move past small talk quickly. Is that fair?
Probably. Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering, I mean, yes, I guess that is it. I also think I'm very receptive. Like,
Yeah.
I have, which I think something you is a word that you use in there somewhere about, and 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 sometimes it's just a facial thing. Like, people just see a face and they're like, oh, that face looks safe. And
Yes. Because that face is looking at me, they're making eye contact, and it seems like they're not going to judge me for whatever comes next. Yes.
yeah. So it's so interesting that you bring up eye contact, because this was a big epiphany to me, that because we use it, it's so important in senior care. Like, it's so important to not talk over someone, but to actually, it makes such a difference.
Yeah.
And it really, especially when there's no language, it allows people to feel seen and heard. And because they are seen and heard. And what I wasn't aware of or hadn't heard articulated as well as you do is that it's such a great creates an equal playing field, if you will, for high status people to actually take the time to make eye contact with everyone in the room. And so if you wanted to talk about your discovery of that.
Oh yeah. Eye gaze is incredibly powerful. It's so much so our brains are evolved to be very attuned to where other people are directing their gaze. And so much
Mhm.
so that if you track people's pupil dilation, like how big and small the dark part of their eye is while they're talking to somebody else, when you are achieving like shared attention and feeling connected, your pupils start to dilate in sync. Like our eyes were they are very evolved for human connection, and we are very sensitive to where other people are looking. Which is, so perhaps it's not that surprising that especially in groups, eye gaze is really powerful. And I found this very eye-opening too, Dani.
Sure.
But in groups, we tend to naturally look at higher status group members. We're looking for them, first of all, because they spend more time talking, like they're dominating the airtime, but also we look to them to signal to us how should we be acting? Like, are they appalled by something that someone is saying? Are they surprised? Are they interested? Are they nodding along? We're just like, we look to them for information about how we should behave in this group. This is just a very natural instinct, which means that we're spending less time looking at low status members of the group, right? And low status can mean a million different things. Psychologists define it as liking and admiration, but it can be determined by all kinds of things: gender, race, age, wealth, status within an organization, knowledge on a certain topic. And the sort of status hierarchy within a group can rearrange even at the topic level. Like, if all of a sudden we're talking about, basketball, I know a lot about basketball and I really love it. But if we switch to talk about, gastrointestinal medicine, I am no longer going to be very vocal about that topic. I don't know anything and I want to learn from other people. So, anyway, the status hierarchy rearranges at the topic level. And what we need to be aware of is that on any topic, we are likely to start excluding people, like the low status members of the group, with our eye gaze because we're literally not looking at them as much. And that's why you start to feel invisible and like you're not even welcome to talk because like people aren't even looking at you as much. Having low status is a very difficult position to be in. If you speak up, people are more likely to dismiss what you're saying or to not trust it or to not believe it. If you don't speak up, they'll never really get to know if you know things. And certainly you have value to add. And so like when you do have value to add, you should add it. But it is a very, very difficult bind to be in. Something that high status group members can do is just nudge themselves to a little bit more, make sure you're catching the eye gaze of everybody in the group as an intervention, knowing that, oh, our natural tendency is to look at the boss and to look at the high status members. So if you push yourself to look at everybody, it means everybody's going to feel a little bit more included. And what we find is those low status group members are more likely to actually speak when they have something to say because they don't feel as invisible.
Yeah.
This also applies, by the way, when you're just like walking down the street. This is something appalling that I realized about myself. We tend to not look at some people, and it can often be very biased. It can be like younger people or people of different races or nationalities or homeless people or whatever. It was a good wake-up call to me to realize, oh, everybody deserves eye gaze. I need to be pushing myself to be looking at everyone to make them feel like they are equally valuable as a human being.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting because when we go in and do these interactive team building events, eye contact is a bit like that's an exercise, like that,
Yeah.
or a game, if you will, of like make eye contact, and also that it gives people permission if they feel seen, then they're more likely to contribute.
Yeah.
And so again, I just think it's interesting. There's so much that we do, that comedians do instinctively, that it's always such a pleasure to hear like scientific evidence that, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, yes, that actually matters. And one thing that you said in the book too, though, is that people can elevate their status with humor.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. This is a really fun study. It doesn't even have to be funny, Dani. In conversation, levity is incredibly effective, especially, I mean, it really doesn't have to be funny at all. There's this amazing research by this guy, Robert Provine, who
Yeah.
sent out all these, you probably know this stuff.
Yeah.
Like he sent out research assistants all over Baltimore just to like watch people and record what did they say right before somebody laughed? Like what made them laugh? What was the precursor to the laughter?
Right.
And 70% of it is not funny at all. Like it's people are laughing in conversation for all kinds of reasons, to be polite, to be deferential, to fill space, to just show, right? Like we're just doing all of these things all the time. And even when things were intentionally funny or viewed as funny, they're not like stand-up jokes. I mean, it's like little quips and offhand things that just feel like charming in that moment. And so in our research, we randomly assigned groups to have someone in the group make a joke or not. And the jokes that we used, Dani, were like not good. I mean, they're not funny. But in the group where the person made the joke, that group member was much more likely to be voted as the leader of the group for the next task.
Oh, wow.
Because even if your joke's not that funny, even if it flops, everybody views you as courageous, right? Like you at least have
Yes.
confidence to try. And both confidence and competence are what we are looking for in our friends and in leaders at work.
So great. First of all, I love that you take the pressure off, like you have to be funny, because that's a lot of why people are hesitant. They're like, I'm not funny. And also that you don't have to be funny is great. It just the mere like courage of putting it out there.
I
And
think my students come in and they want me to say like, "Oh no, you're wrong. You're so funny." And instead I'm like, "No, you're right. You're not that funny." But you don't have to be. I probably can't make you much funnier, but you also like it, you don't have to be. There are so many levity moves that pull people's attention in that are not about being funny at all. It's about finding the fun, making it fun for everybody there, making it feel safe and warm, right? Compliments, and just making sure you don't circle the drain on a topic that's not rewarding anymore. Like move to something else.
yeah, well, I do love that you make a point of saying in the book, like, I'm not going to teach anybody how to be funny. I'm not going to do that. And then you actually go on and give all these ways that you can be funny.
It's
So,
worth trying. It's worth it for them to try. There's no harm in trying, I think.
right, but this idea that you can't, because I would hear that a lot when I was working at UCLA, right? Like, oh, you can't make somebody funny, and comedians will always tell you you can't make someone funny. And the thing is, yeah, you can't give someone like a crazy, wacky,
A script. Yeah.
and or even like a compelling personality necessarily,
Yeah.
but you can give them tools to be authentic and to
Yeah.
say that little quirky thing, that unexpected thing, to take advantage of the element of surprise, you
Which
know?
takes courage.
Yeah.
I think what you can work on is working on your courage. It's like these little fleeting moments of courage and sparkle that you just have to be brave enough
Yes.
to grab.
Yes, and so it is incumbent on leaders to create that safe space to generate that. So,
Exactly right.
and one of the ways I think that you also articulate, right, is self-deprecation, is bringing some vulnerability into the room.
Yes.
And I'm always very hesitant about the self-deprecation. I had a boss that said to me once, Dani, after 40, nobody wants to hear self-deprecation. It's not. And and then someone else said to me, yeah, you can be self-deprecating, just not about the thing you're hired to do, which is
Yeah.
the big one that I say everywhere all the time. And so I'm curious, anything else to say about self-deprecation?
I think that idea of like you can be self-deprecating, but not about the thing you were hired to do is very linked to what I was saying earlier about topic. It varies from topic to topic. If everyone is looking to you to be an expert on a certain topic, that's probably not the moment to be like, I actually don't know what I'm talking about.
Right. Oh,
But you could self-deprecate about almost anything else, right?
right,
If you're right, and you should to show your vulnerability and your humanity.
right.
Yeah, so it sort of
Yeah.
varies from one topic to the next.
Yeah, I always say, like, I'm not gonna walk into a room and go, well, I mean, I wish I was funny, but but I absolutely will talk about my cooking,
Yeah,
because I
totally.
crossed, and that's the end of that. So I'm happy to share that.
Can I share my favorite thing to self-deprecate about? I drive a minivan. First of all, that's already so embarrassing for a lot of people, but I have a lot of kids and it's like a living room on wheels. It's amazing. But also my students all make fun of it because it is like unabashedly messy in my minivan. There's just like goldfish everywhere and so they're like it goes against your whole persona. You're so polished except for your dirty minivan. So
Well,
that's my go.
thank all I can say is thank goodness, because otherwise you would be too perfect. But they used to say if you look at a woman's handbag too, you can get a whole personality thing. Okay, so but we're talking about being courageous, which big fan, but you also have this upsetting realization that outspoken women are viewed more negatively than outspoken men.
Oh, I know.
I'm so sorry. Now I'm gonna have to just leave. Like that's I mean, what?
You know what? I get a lot of questions from my students and from readers of the book about gender dynamics. I
Hmm,
think especially because I'm a woman and they feel safe like asking about it.
hmm.
Here's what I always say. You know, the world is how it is. We have been living in a time of tremendous cultural shift. I was just reflecting about this with my kids, like the things, not just technology, but like the way culture has changed in the last 50 years and what women are able to do now, even compared to 50 years ago, is amazing and crazy. And so I think we just continue to find ourselves in this phase of cultural shift, especially related to race and gender and ageism and then all of the technology stuff. And so I think we just need to be willing to confront the world as it is and where we are in that cultural shift. And luckily, in my study of conversation as a scientist, one of the things I have learned is that men and women have a lot more in common in how they communicate than differences. For example, there was this amazing study run by a psychologist at the University of Arizona named Matthias Mell. He had people wear a microphone that records like ambient noise all day long, like snippets of what's going on in your orbit, like every 2 minutes. And so you get this full sample of like humanity, like what is your day like? What does it sound like? And what they learned is that men and women are speaking exactly the same number of words on average. So even if women have a stereotype of being chattier, both men and women on average are speaking about 16,000 words per day on average. Like
Okay.
that kind of finding to me is sort of saying like, yes, probably there are contexts where women are more likely to speak and not speak. The same is true for men. You bring them into a book club about menopause and they're going to be really quiet too. And so those sort of on the margin moderating effects of gender and differences are more a reflection of our culture right now,
Hmm.
not of our humanity. Like at our baseline as humans, we're all speaking the same amount. Our minds wander on average about the same between men and women.
Hmm.
And so just that's sort of like my starting point. It's like, let's both focus on what men and women do the same. And also, yes, there can be kind of interesting differences in what they do differently. And one of the things that we stumbled on that men and women seem to do differently these days is laughing. I don't know if I wrote about that in the book, Dani. Did you?
No,
Maybe
I
you
don't
did.
recall that. No.
We have found that women laugh on average more than men. And we suspect that it is because, so we have this from survey data. If you ask people, how much did you smile and laugh yesterday? Women say they smiled and laughed more than men, even though they also report being less happy. So it's not necessarily a reflection of like mirth or joy.
Or
Um,
maybe men are reticent to admit that they laughed, like
maybe.
it as a sign of weakness.
So then we study actual conversations and we see that, oh, women there too in the transcripts are laughing more frequently than
Hmm.
men, it
Hmm.
seems, at least in the context that we have studied. And then we wondered, like, is this it can't be real. Like, is it a gender thing or is it a status thing? Because women tend to occupy positions of lower status in the workplace.
Hmm.
Have they learned to laugh more as a signal of respect and deference? Like, oh, we get into these equilibria where like men are making slightly more jokes and women are like expected to laugh at them. So we ran this study where we had pairs of people, we made them write songs together. And they were mixed gender, men and women. And then we randomly assigned them to be either the producer of the songs, this high power person who gets to make all the decisions and they make all the money, or the singer, the person who just has to like do the producer's bidding and then perform the song at the end. So we're manipulating status and then we measure laughter. And what do you see? Well, when you put women in that high status position, they don't show that laughter effect anymore. They're not laughing as much as men when they're in a high status position. So it does seem to be driven by these inherent status differences that women have just learned to laugh because, and they're not wrong, right? Like being in a low status position, you probably do need to laugh more to make high status people feel seen and heard and to seem
Well,
polite.
yeah, but I also think that it speaks to that fear that laughter is somehow creating laugh, like being funny is somehow undermines your authority. Like
Right.
there's no place to be funny here. I'm leading this song, and so that's something that also has been disproven through science that actually, in fact, it's makes you more appealing and attractive and respected to use humor.
Yeah.
So that's super. Oh, good. We're just big fans here. All right. I want to talk about too, and we're welcome. Oh, please send in questions. If you have any questions, Professor Brooks will definitely answer them and I'll cheer her on. Uh, uh, one exercise that you do that was also, again, so familiar to me. So I taught this like couples workshop at Duke in for Fuqua. And and I had them take the sentence, "Did you load the dishwasher?" and say it all different ways to illustrate the meaning, the impact of tone and how we
Mm,
manipulate,
I love that.
well, you love it. You do the same exercise with "What have you been up to?"
Yeah.
Same thing. And so that's so if you could, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, like that listening is so much a part of talking, I guess is my point, right? And
It's almost about delivery, right? Like that when, especially when comedians talk about delivery, so much of it is in the acoustic properties of your voice. So in conversation, when we're studying, we think about three buckets. One is the words that you're saying. So, did you load the dishwasher, or like, what have you been up to? The second is nonverbal. So your hand gesticulation, your facial expressions, everything that your conversation partner takes in through their eyes, right? Like everything they see is essentially nonverbal information that they're processing. And then there's a third bucket, which is the acoustic properties, which is separate from the meaning of the words themselves and separate from it's everything they take in through their ears. And I think a really exciting area of behavioral science that we'll be learning lots more is about the acoustic properties of conversation. We actually ran a study where we had people do conversational job interviews, and then we broke down like, okay, well, what words were they saying in those interviews? What nonverbals were they doing? And what did their voices sound like? And which of those was most predictive of whether they were actually good at the job later? And what we found is like what people say during their job interviews is like completely irrelevant because you can just make up anything. And like what you cover in a 20-minute job interview almost has no bearing on what the work you're going to be doing and the types of conversations you might have on the job. Nonverbal, same thing. They're not very predictive. The acoustic properties, though, the energy that someone brings and that they convey in a conversation are very consistent over time. So, like, they're likely to bring that high energy or that very soothing, welcoming tone into the work they do once they're on the job. And I think we have a lot left to learn about. Just think it's really important, and we haven't quite like uncovered that, taken that lid off that whole category of stuff. It's like the acoustic properties of conversation and how we deliver things. What if we just stood up right now, Dan, and we started shouting at each other, you know?
yes, we'd seem hysterical, but it reminds
Fun.
me, but fun, unhinged in a fun way. Um, it reminds me of when I came to your class and somebody asked me, what do you look for when you hire? Do you look for the funniest? I mean, I often tell the story. Do you look for the funniest person in the room? And I said, no, I look for the person who's going to change the energy in the room.
Exactly.
I look for the person who's going to light up the room.
Yeah.
And so that's so interesting that that's what you've observed too, that it almost doesn't matter what you're saying. It's like how you're saying it.
That's how you're saying it. Exactly.
All right. So I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between virtual and in person, and the impact that it has. And it's interesting because I have the memoir class I've taught for my 85 to 100-year-olds. And we often meet on Zoom because it's more comfortable for them. We met initially during COVID. And yesterday I was with them and it was so different. It is almost like it's almost like if you were watching the Golden Girls and then like B. Arthur just stepped out of the screen and was like sitting with you. That's an old-timey reference, everyone. Sorry for those
I
under.
love it.
But Estelle Getty and Betty White are suddenly sitting next to you, and you've enjoyed them in your living room on the screen, but now they're breathing next to you, and what a difference. And I guess there are studies that you've encountered that really quantify the difference between a virtual experience and an in-person experience.
Yeah, we find ourselves in a very interesting digital world, as we all know, and we all got so good at remote conversation during the pandemic, especially. Um, and I know that was such an interesting time for Laughter on Call as well. So the thing that's amazing about technology is that it has allowed us to be in touch, in conversation with like more people in more places than ever before in human history. And that is incredible, except that behavioral science research suggests that in-person conversation really is irreplaceable.
Mm.
It
Mm.
is the rewards of, like we were saying before, because you get all three of the buckets. You get the words, you get all of the nonverbal information. You can see what shoes they're wearing. You can see the tiny sliver of gray in their hair. You can see what earrings they're wearing. Like right? Like you can see everything about how their hands move and everything. And you get all the acoustic properties of conversation that are not disrupted. So even a call like this, the tiny delays in how Zoom works do add meaningful disruptions for comedic timing, for feeling connected, etc. So even the best like video chats are still very, very information poor compared to
Mhm.
in-person conversation. And what we're learning is that that is very meaningful for a sense of connection. I do an exercise with my students called a communication audit. And I urge anyone else to try this too, where I ask them to write down all of the incoming and outgoing messages in their world. So that means you're going to, write down when all the texts are coming in while you're on a Zoom call. If then you pick up
Oh.
the phone, then you turn to your child and have a conversation. Then, oh, somebody texted me. Oh, I sent an email. So you do it in this way that starts to show how braided and overlapping all of these different channels of communication are for us these days.
Mhm.
So we reflect about that, like what is the experience of conversational toggling doing to our brains, and in what way is that good and bad? We can be in touch with many more people, but also in what level of depth.
Mhm.
And then something my students always raise is like, if I ask you to look back on all those conversations in that 20-minute period, which ones felt the most rewarding? Which ones felt the most real? And without a doubt, it's only the ones that they had in person and maybe some on the phone and maybe a little bit on Zoom. But like
Mhm.
everything else that we're doing, emailing, texting, all of that is transactional. It's great for
Mm.
information exchange, but it is not a substitute for human connection and
Right.
real conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a lot of what we've been in the corporate space that we've been dealing with in the last 2 years is like getting people to have in-person engagement because they've been starved of it
Yeah.
prior. And that
So
was,
let me give you some stats. I think I told you about this.
yeah.
I think we've just underestimated how much more rich in-person interaction is. Like people are 30 times more likely to laugh in person than on any other channel of communication. They are 34 times more persuasive in person than over email or text. And
Mm.
so I think intuitively we know that in person feels better and more connective, but when you start to look at the statistics of like how much more compelling, you're like, oh, geez, I should be making sure that I'm seeing people in person.
Yeah, I mean, it's a miracle that business is getting done at all,
It
virtually,
is.
given
And you start
given
to
the
realize, well, much of business and is about information exchange and transactional learning, but it can't be a substitute for face-to-face interaction.
yeah, yeah. And how oftentimes we can't communicate the experience that people will have being in the same space and laughing together as opposed to a virtual. Although what amazed me, frankly, is how we still were able to have impact
Amazing.
on,
It amazes me. I have always been amazed about that for laughter on call specifically. I think it is a testament to the power of what you're doing is that the power of it even transcends virtual modalities. Like it
yeah.
is so important that it doesn't even matter that much that you're not together. Like it's still so important.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it still lands. We had
Yeah.
clients in New York during COVID with comedians in LA, and they formed real relationships. And one of them was like, went out to lunch with them when she went to New York. Like it was a real connection. And so that was surprising because, as you know, like we were just gonna wrap it up. And now, of course, it's so much better because we have all of our senior work is back in person and we're able to really be with each other.
That is one thing that I've seen in the research as well, is like even the promise of a possibility of seeing someone in person in the
Mm,
future, even the distant future, can make virtual interactions feel much more meaningful, because it's like, oh, there is the possibility that we will actually have a real face-to-face conversation or relationship at some point, which might be something you
wow.
could incorporate into your programming, is like, maybe someday we'll have a global meetup with all the folks, you know?
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's kind of like when you're a performer and you set a performance
Mm.
date, you
Yeah.
rehearse differently because you
Yeah.
know you're headed to I know you know that because you have a band.
I do have
In
a
case
band.
anyone missed that
And
earlier.
when we have a show on the calendar, like a gig coming
Right,
up, we're like a completely different band
right, right.
in
Absolutely.
good ways and bad ways, but mostly good ways.
Right, mostly good ways, but then there's also like, you're not really going to do that, are you? Because we're going to be in front of people. Like, it's
Oh,
like,
we get intense. And there are two other Harvard professors in the band, so like everybody's intensity comes out. We're like, we have to do this.
that is super funny. Okay, we do have a question. Question in the
Ooh.
house. Have you noticed changes in what your students think is funny? Are people more uptight now or more loose?
Oh, that's a great question. In my class, I teach a framework that is from our friends at Stanford, Jennifer Acker and Naomi Bagdonis, who have a great book called Humor Seriously. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend. It's a great book. Um, and Naomi often will come and visit my class, actually, and they teach a framework about different styles of humor. It's two axes. That one is about expressive versus subtle, and the other is affiliative versus aggressive. And their argument is that all four of these quadrants, whether you're expressive and affiliative, or subtle and affiliative, subtle and aggressive, or expressive and aggressive, that they're all good. Like fostering an awareness of what your humor style is, and finding more patience and less judgment about other people's humor styles, especially when they're different than yours, can be so valuable. I don't know if I've noticed that my students' humor styles or preferences have been shifting over time. I think what does noticeably change over time is their level of enthusiasm or
Hmm,
interest in certain topics.
hmm,
For example, so I've been at the business school for like 13 years, and whenever I talk about like race or gender, like sometimes they will like stand up and cheer. Like if they're just more open about issues around like equity, I guess, and than they used to be, right? So like they're less uh they're more, it's maybe more socially acceptable to be publicly supportive of a certain thing. And I'm constantly trying to keep my finger on the pulse of like, what are they going to think is funny? What are they going to think is appropriate and not appropriate? I'll give an example. When I used to teach negotiation, I taught this case about a anonymized quarterback in the NFL who was negotiating his contract. And at the end of the case, I reveal that it was about Tom Brady all along. This very famous quarterback for the New England Patriots. Um, and I used to bring a Super Bowl ring to class because my colleague was on the coaching staff of the New England Patriots. So that was always fun. Um, and one year I showed the picture of Tom Brady up on my slides, and I was sort of like, ladies, enjoy the view. He's a very nice looking man. And I was like 27 at the time, and I thought it was pretty funny. And I had some students meet with me afterwards just to be like, it was funny, but also very heteronormative. And I had not, this was back in like 2013. I had never even heard the word heteronormative before. Maybe some of you haven't either. It means that you're like assuming everyone is romantically interested in the opposite gender from you, which would make sense. I'm married to a man and I had never heard that word before. But that's the kind of feedback that I get from my students sometimes to help me learn, oh, what are people's preferences about humor these days? What do people view as funny, not funny, appropriate, not appropriate? What little risks, what little moments of courage should I take in the classroom, especially in front of a group of 90 people, and which one, and what shouldn't I? And I think my main takeaway is that, like, on the margin, yes, it pays to be courageous, but it also pays to be gentle.
Mm,
Almost always. So if you can find that marriage of courageous but gentle, I think that plays well for almost everyone.
yeah, I mean that's the big challenge with humor, right? Particularly in a big group of people that aren't in a comedy club and have come to drink and hear you be crass. Like
Oh,
when,
exactly. So I think actually watching all these stand-up routines on Netflix and stuff can give people the impression that um, that type of crass humor or like edgy jokes should have a place in conversation, which is a completely different task, and is not true. Like comedy does not actually have a place in most live conversations. Instead, we should be looking for like mild, gentle moments of humor where we can share laughter together. Or just, it doesn't even have to be funny, just moments of warmth where everybody feels like safe and included and like they're having a good time. So it's like stop trying to be funny and just look to find the fun. Uh,
yes,
yeah.
yeah. And we've had to explain that. I think I won't name a company, but there was one company that was all ready to book us, and then somebody said, "Oh no, we can't risk it because
Right.
and they
Yeah.
don't, and we talk all the time about affiliative humor, affiliate, we can't land that point enough. All right, we are almost out of time with you. I so appreciate your time. Um, is someone writing a question here? Dr. Brooks, that's a very long question.
I
Okay.
think Jay's asking about, oh, this is so interesting. Yeah, just this, how do we strike the right balance between leveraging the advantages of email, text, and virtual meetings, and also shifting the emphasis back to in-person meetings? I think we've seen this debate sort of play out publicly with companies trying to sort of mandate people being in the office or like everyone can work from home. And I think everybody, both as individuals and as companies, is trying to find the right balance of how do we take advantage of the amazing opportunities that technology allow us to connect with more people and in more ways from more places than ever before, but also in-person interaction matters too. And I think I would just say, like, continue to play around with what's possible and what the boundaries are. I know Laughter on Call continues to foster a sort of portfolio, a mixed offering of services that are in person and virtual. And again, even the promise of seeing that you're going to see people in person at some point in the future can be very motivating and feel very much make your virtual interactions feel more connected
Yeah,
and real.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Um, oh wait, we have one more. And then how do you factor individual personalities personae into your idea of comedy? I'm not sure I understand that.
I think I would recommend reading Humor Seriously by Jennifer and Naomi. It's a great book, and they go into all kinds of stuff about personal humor styles, what you like, what the type of humor you like to create, and the type that you like to absorb from other people.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's a great book. All right, so I just have one more question because I always like to end on this. Can you think of a moment in your life where you didn't expect there to be humor or laughter, and there was, and it really changed your perspective or changed the energy in the room?
Oh my God, what a great question. It makes me think of a time. So, in my department at Harvard, we really only have to make one big decision together per year, which is hiring new faculty. I remember this time we were having our hiring meeting. It tends to be very contentious. It's like a very tense situation. Everybody's voting and everybody disagrees, and it's tough. And my colleague's phone rang. She had forgotten to turn off her ringer. And everybody sort of like looks over at her, like, how dare you disrupt this very important meeting? And her ringtone was Bad to the Bone, like da na 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 na
Oh,
bad. You know, like this. It was like very not professional. And it was her husband calling, who is also on the faculty. at Harvard. And so everyone was sort of like, she was mortified that it was disruptive. Everyone was sort of like, oh. And then my colleague and bandmate, Mike, whose birthday it is today, actually, he just made this amazing little offhand comment. He just goes, I didn't know Jeff was bad to the bone. Instead of sort of like casting her an angry glance, he just sort of made this nice joke. And everybody laughed and it cut the tension. And honestly, I think it really helped us with the rest of the meeting to have a much more congenial discussion about even about our hiring stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, that's proven, right? When you get people laughing together and suddenly they're telling you more and sharing more authentically because you've shared that moment and you've also gains perspective,
Yeah.
right? Suddenly it's not life and death who we're going to hire. No, there's family and there's other things. So
Yeah.
so cool. All right. Well, Alison, Professor Brooks' book is
Oh, yeah.
Talk, The Science of Conversation. So please race out and get it. And if you want to know more about bringing laughter to your senior, to your team, to your culture, to your life, please check us out. We're happy to help. And I'm just so appreciative of you, Professor Brooks, Professor Alison Brooks, for taking the
Thank you
time.
so much for having me, Dani. Everybody hire Laughter on Call. They're amazing. You guys are fabulous. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Love the book.
Bye,
So see you
guys.
again. Bye, everyone. Thank you.